I want to show you something that changed how I work. I ran the same 10 real-world tasks through DeepSeek V4, GPT 5.5, and Claude Sonnet 4.6. Same prompts, same complexity, same evaluation criteria, and the results were not what I expected. DeepSeek V4, a Chinese open-source model that costs a fraction of the competition, beat both GPT 5.5 and Claude on 5 of the 10 tasks, lost on 3, tied on 2. And here is the number that matters most if you are in India. DeepSeek V4 API access costs roughly 88% less than OpenAI at equivalent usage. That is not a rounding error. That is a different category of tool entirely. Let me give you the quick context before we get into the comparisons. DeepSeek is a Chinese AI lab backed by the quantitative hedge fund High Flyer. DeepSeek V4, also called DeepSeek R2 in some documents, is their latest frontier model, released in early 2025. It uses a mixture of experts architecture, meaning it activates only a subset of its parameters for any given task, which dramatically reduces compute cost without sacrificing capability. The result? A model that benchmarks at GPT-4 level or above on coding, reasoning, and math at open-source pricing. You can run it via their API, through Hugging Face, or self-host it if your company has a GPU server. That last option is completely unavailable with ChatGPT or Claude. Let us talk money, because this is where it gets interesting for Indian freelancers, developers, and startup teams. OpenAI's GPT 5.5 API costs $15 per million input tokens and $60 per million output tokens at the standard tier. Claude Sonnet 4.6 via Anthropic API costs $3 per million input tokens and $15 per million output. DeepSeek V4 via their API, $0.14 per million input tokens, $2 per million output tokens. I will let that land for a moment. If you are a developer in Bangalore, Hyderabad, or Pune building an AI-powered SaaS product and your backend calls an LLM thousands of times per day, DeepSeek V4 makes that business model viable where GPT 5.5 does not. This is not about which model is philosophically better. This is about which model you can actually afford to ship with. My first test was code generation. I asked all 3 models to write a full Python fast API backend for a simple user authentication system with JWT tokens, database integration using SQL Alchemy, and proper error handling. GPT 5.5 produced clean, well-commented code in about 12 seconds. Claude Sonnet 4.6 was slightly more verbose, but added helpful inline comments and a testing scaffold I did not ask for. DeepSeek V4 was faster than both, under 8 seconds. And the code was production-ready. In fact, the error handling on edge cases was arguably better than GPT 5.5. Round 1, DeepSeek wins on speed and cost. Quality, roughly equivalent to GPT 5.5, slightly behind Claude's thoughtfulness on test scaffolding. Second test, multi-step logical reasoning. I gave all 3 a complex business scenario, a startup with 3 co-founders, a vesting cliff dispute, a departing employee, and a potential acquirer, and asked for a structured legal and strategic analysis. This is exactly the kind of nuanced contextual reasoning where model differences become apparent. Claude Sonnet 4.6 was noticeably better here. It identified 3 risk factors that GPT 5.5 missed entirely, and structured its answer with a clarity that felt like reading a good consultant's memo. DeepSeek V4 performed at GPT 5.5 level, solid, accurate, but somewhat generic in its framing. On pure reasoning depth, Claude first, GPT 5.5 second, DeepSeek V4 third. But remember, DeepSeek costs 90% less to run this query. Third test, long-form content generation. I asked each model to write a 2,000-word thought leadership article on the future of remote work for a B2B SaaS blog. All 3 produced serviceable drafts. GPT 5.5's article was well-structured and read like a senior editor had reviewed it. Claude's version had a distinctive voice, more opinionated, more willing to take a position, which is exactly what good thought leadership needs. DeepSeek V4 produced content that was accurate and well-organized but felt slightly templated. The kind of article that checks all the SEO boxes, but does not make you want to read the next paragraph. For content that will represent a brand, Claude wins. For internal documentation, reports, or structured outputs where voice matters less, DeepSeek is completely viable. Fourth test, I gave all 3 a raw CSV of e-commerce transaction data, 500 rows, and ask them to identify trends, flag anomalies, and suggest 3 actionable business recommendations. This is a use case that thousands of Indian small business owners and startup analysts face every week. GPT 5.5 and Claude both performed excellently, catching a suspicious refund pattern in the data that I had seeded intentionally. DeepSeek V4 also caught it, though it framed the recommendation less actionably. What surprised me was speed. DeepSeek processed and responded almost 40% faster than both competitors on this task. For data-heavy workflows where you are running hundreds of such analyses, that speed differential compounds. Fifth test, and this one is specifically relevant to Indian users. I asked all 3 models about GST filing procedures for a small service-based business registered under the composition scheme, the MSME loan eligibility requirements under the Udyam registration portal, and the correct TDS deduction rates for professional fees paid to a freelancer. This is where I expected DeepSeek to struggle, and it did, partially. Its GST answer was mostly accurate but missed a recent amendment from the 2025 union budget. Claude and GPT 5.5 were more current and more precise on the regulatory nuances. If your use case involves India-specific compliance, legal, or financial content, do not use DeepSeek as your primary model without a human review layer. For everything else, the gap is much smaller than you expect. Based on my testing, here is the honest recommendation. Use DeepSeek V4 when you are building API-driven products where cost per call matters, when you need fast code generation or structured data outputs, when you are running high-volume repetitive tasks like email drafts, product descriptions, or data formatting. Use Claude when the output needs genuine nuance, strategic analysis, legal reasoning, content that requires a real voice, or anything where missing a subtle point could be costly. Use GPT 5.5 when you need the most current information on recent events through the browsing mode, or when you are building within the Microsoft ecosystem and the Azure integration makes practical sense. These are not competing products. They are different tools for different jobs. I cannot cover DeepSeek without addressing the privacy elephant in the room. DeepSeek is a Chinese company. Their privacy policy states that data processed through their API may be stored on servers located in China. For Indian developers building consumer apps that handle user personal data, this creates a compliance question under India's Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. It may also create an issue for clients in regulated industries, healthcare, fintech, government-adjacent work. The open-source self-hosted version solves this completely. Your data never leaves your infrastructure. But the hosted API version does carry real data residency risk. Know your use case. Know your compliance requirements, and make the decision with full information. Here is my current personal stack because I think specifics are more useful than generalities. For all my coding tasks, DeepSeek V4 via API routed through a simple Python wrapper I built that logs token usage. For research and strategic writing, Claude Sonnet 4.6 because the reasoning quality is worth the premium for high-stakes output. For client-facing content where I need to cite current events, GPT 5.5 with browsing enabled. Total monthly API spend before this optimization, around 4,000 rupees. After switching coding and bulk tasks to DeepSeek, under 800 rupees per month. Same output quality for 80% of my work. Better output quality for the 20% where I specifically chose the premium model. That is the optimization worth making. The AI tools market in 2026 is not winner-take-all. It is not even close. The smartest builders are not loyal to one model. They are building workflows that route different tasks to different models based on cost, speed, and quality requirements. DeepSeek V4 is a genuine frontier model that happens to be open source and dramatically cheaper than its Western competitors. It has real limitations on India-specific knowledge and nuanced reasoning. It has real strengths on code, speed, and cost efficiency. The question is not whether DeepSeek is better than ChatGPT. The question is whether you have a system that uses the right model for the right task. If you want help building that system, the next video covers exactly that. A full multi-model routing workflow you can set up in under an hour, completely free.